Is Fox about to turn the suspension world upside down? With the new Podium enduro fork, they're sure hoping so. They've finally brought an inverted fork to the mass market. But is it any good? Stay tuned to learn all about it and find out how it's performed so far in this feature on loamwolf.com. Let's go. So then, what is the Fox Podium fork designed to be? This is not a direct replacement for anything in the Fox lineup. Instead, it's a hyper premium offering in the hard-hitting enduro space, roughly equivalent to a 38, but with its own unique handling characteristics and pros and cons that are brought about by the inverted design. What exactly do I mean by inverted? Well, it literally means that the outer legs and the stanchions have been swapped from their conventional orientation that you would normally find in mountain bike forks like the 36 or the 38. So instead of the crown connecting to the stanchions, instead it connects to the outer legs. Then down at the bottom, you've got the axle and the dropouts directly connected to the stanchions, which then move up and down into the upper legs. This comes with some notable improvements and benefits, but also some notable engineering challenges that Fox has had to overcome, which is why we haven't seen an inverted fork from them hitting the mass market to date. To learn more about the journey of the Podium and why now was the right time for Fox to bring an inverted single crown fork to the market, we had a chat with Ariel, the product development and R&D engineer at Fox, to learn a little bit more.
Why did we all of a sudden decide to do an inverted fork, right? It really came down to like one of our senior engineers, Bill Becker, doing a study on bushing pressures. For model year 26, we put a big focus on reducing any kind of binding or any friction that builds up then releases partway through the stroke. That is always something that translates through to the rider's hands very in a negative way, and we wanted to reduce that as much as possible. It's one of the reasons we did our like glide core air springs that we've come out with. He dove into studying the buildup of pressure on the bushings as you load the fork a lot, like fore and aft. The stanchion's getting pushed harder into the bushing material, and that will cause some binding and some of that buildup of pressure and then release. You get partway through the stroke, the load increases to a point where the fork doesn't want to slide as easy anymore, and then all of a sudden it breaks through, and that never really feels good to a rider. There was two key things to the inverted design that showed that the bushing pressure buildup was greatly reduced in an inverted fork design. The first one and the simplest one is that we were able to spread the bushings out another 50 millimeters. So in traditional forks, we've pushed that almost as far as we can get. But to get 50 more millimeters is a huge gain in itself.
You were saying that the standard, or in a 38, it's about 120 mil versus 170.
And now we're at 170, which that's a huge jump. So, and we fight for millimeters in the rest of our forks. But the second one was also that in a traditional fork, the distance from your axle to the top bushing never changes as the fork goes through the travel. And so as you increase loads, the lever arm is always the same length. And in an inverted fork, your axle, as you compress the fork and inevitably put more load into the fork, gets closer to that bushing, so that lever arm shortens, which is actually beneficial, right? Like the harder you're pushing into that fork, the shorter the lever arm that's pushing that bushing that stanchion into the bushing gets. And so when he plotted those bushing pressures, you can see that with that overlap and that axle ratio changing, it's a drastic decrease in bushing pressure buildup. And that was kind of the final thing that said, we need to build one of these and see how it goes. Yeah.
Reduce bushing pressure buildup. That's lowering the friction, the sticking that's going to happen, especially in awkwardly loaded scenarios.
Yeah, like when you're really heavily loading the fork in the fore aft or splay load, like landing a big jump to flat. That's when the fork is still able to move really freely like you want it to. And that allows you to, instead of having that kind of stick slip phenomena and binding phenomenon, the fork's able to move all the time. So now you can really tune in those regions where you may have been paying tuning sacrifices with the damping and stuff like that to help that issue.
Well, bushing pressures probably aren't something that you've heard talked about all that much. I think it's just a result of all of the work that's been done to optimize the rest of the fork, and now bushing pressures and the stiction that can result from those pressures increasing too high is now something that's limiting the overall performance of the fork. So it's been really interesting to see Fox making such a focus on increasing the bushing spacing and reducing the overall friction there to increase the overall performance of the fork. And it's been really notable when we've been out on the trail, the effects that the overall package, but I think quite a lot of that being those bushing pressures and the extra bushing spacing has on the result in performance of the fork on the trail. Think of the times that you've got the bike leant over in rough terrain in a corner that's all blown out, or in a rock garden when you've got impacts coming at you from every which way. The fork isn't just taking a movement up and down or even forward and backwards. It's coming in from the side, it's creating twisting forces, and anything that you can do to reduce the amount of friction that builds up when the fork is dynamically loaded is really going to improve the performance.
One thing that's really been standing out to me so far with the fork is that I'm not trying to bring comfort back in by reducing the amount of damping.
Yeah.
What other factors are contributing to that just consistent smoothness that I've been feeling so far?
Well, I think that's it, is that the fork doesn't want to bind. When you ride hard, a lot of us, especially bigger riders like yourself and I, we have to run a pretty firm fork. There's just no way around it. You need that support when you're riding down steep, chunky terrain. Otherwise, you're going out the front. Nobody wants to do that. But by doing that, I think we pay some penalties, right? Of harshness and maybe not the most supple feeling fork on the little small stuff sometimes. And I think this fork is allowing us to be able to have the support we need, use damping and use spring to hold us up like we need, but not pay as big a penalty for doing that.
As we ride this most excellent bit of single track, it's time to talk about this super exciting fork, the Podium. I remember 2016, I rode a Dorado, my first upside down experience, and I did not enjoy it that much. So coming into this, I had concerns over how stiff it was going to be, whether it just makes me feel like I am going to be losing control the whole time because of the flex. But I really think Fox has absolutely nailed the stiffness balance with this fork. It's amazing really how suspension construction has come on so far in relatively little time.
I remember back in 2016, I owned a Manitou Dorado.
Yeah.
And I didn't really enjoy the amount of torsional flex that fork had. It had its benefits for sure, but there were times where I really struggled with the front end control when you're pushing as hard as a downhill bike or long travel enduro bike these days is pushed.
Yeah.
With this fork, I've not been feeling that effect quite so negatively so far, which is really impressive, I think, for a single crown fork.
Yeah.
What have you implemented to improve that torsional stiffness and make it a rideable, aggressive fork?
It's a great question, right? There's always been a lot of drawbacks to the inverted forks that have been available, and I think I've felt, and a lot of us have felt the same things you have. And so that was a big question for us when we started that. Okay, cool, the bushing pressures are really low, that's great, but if it's not torsionally stiff enough, you can't steer the bike, then that's not viable either, right? So we dove in and thought about all the options that we could try and did a bunch of work on FEA and stuff to figure out what's going to make the fork more torsionally stiff. And I think the big question in our head was, how stiff do we need it to be torsionally, and is there too stiff? And so we made a bunch of different upper tube options and thicknesses, different crowns, different lower legs, and we even did different dropouts. We did a 15 originally, and we made a 20. In testing, it seemed like a lot of the heavy options kept winning, and we were a little bit like, oh no, it's getting heavier, because the weight's a thing, and it isn't a light fork. But we let performance drive, and when we moved to axle, 15 kind of got crossed off pretty early because it didn't have it. It wasn't enough. You noticed it too much. We got rid of that, and we focused on 20, which is fine. 20 by 110 is a standard. It's not a proprietary thing, and so we were cool with that. And we had a bunch of different stiffnesses of axles, and first round we did were aluminum axles just because they're light, and that was nice. And we got to the stiffest aluminum option, and we said, fork's riding really good at this point, that's awesome. But that question still lingers, okay, well, the stiffest option just won, so do we need to go stiffer? There's a bit of testing where you're like, am I just believing in it because I want it to work, you know what I mean? So we need to go stiffer. So we came away from one of those test sessions going okay, how do we make another because the axle was getting pretty thick. We're like, how do we make it stiffer? And it was like, let's do steel. So we made a steel option that was just as stiff as the aluminum one that won out. And we made some stiffer options in steel after that. And we rode those, and we actually did find that we got to a point where there's some magic in a little bit of torsional flex when the fork's really stiff this way. And we found a place at which some of the magic and like turns and some of that good stuff that you felt yesterday, we've tested in the lab to make sure everything's stiff. We wanted to go stiffer someday, but we think we found a pretty good sweet spot. And that's how we ended up there, by letting performance drive and testing in the blind.
So then, let's talk a little bit about the specs of the new Fox Podium fork. Now this is a top tier, hard-hitting enduro fork, and as such, Fox has really given it the full works treatment with all of their highest end features. They're not offering it in a Performance Elite or a Performance version just now. Instead, they've just gone with the full factory spec. So that is a Grip X2 damper with the 4-way adjustability, so high speed and low speed, compression and rebound. And then the stanchions are of course Kashima coated as you'd expect from a factory level Fox fork, with carbon fiber molded stanchion guards there in place to keep those stanchions clear. And they also help to guide the brake hose safely around the stanchion to keep it out of harm's way. On the inside of the other fork leg, you've got Fox's new Glide Core air spring. This carries over from the 36, and it's essentially an air spring that is decoupled at both ends thanks to nitrile butadiene, a sort of rubber composite material that is used to connect both ends of the shaft into the fork. That means that the ends of the shaft are able to rotate and flex a little bit, meaning that as the fork is loaded and twists and flexes, the air shaft is able to remain more axially aligned, meaning that it doesn't have any extra stiction as a result. And it helps to just let the fork work smoother regardless of the loading scenario, helping to keep the front wheel tracking and giving you front end traction. There's also a little bit of axial compliance built into that Glide Core air spring, meaning that before the friction is overcome for the air spring to start moving, the nitrile butadiene inserts have a little bit of flex to them that will allow the front wheel to start moving up and down ever so slightly before the air spring is engaged, meaning you just get that extra little sort of micro chatter sensitivity to help keep things nice and comfortable under your hands. On the front axle, they've used a 20 by 110mm spacing, so your typical enduro front wheel might not fit this fork. You might have to get different spacers or a whole new front hub, but they did this to increase the overall stiffness down in this area, and they really worked on a number of different iterations, as Ariel will tell us, to end up with the ultimate kind of stiffness balance for that front axle. And then mounting the front brake is a 200mm post mount, and the fork will accept up to a 230mm if you're wanting some serious stopping power up front. Fox is offering the Podium in a choice of either 160mm or 170mm of travel, and the axle to crown height is only a couple of millimeters longer than a 38 in the same travel, meaning it's not going to change your geometry notably. Fox is interestingly also offering a choice of two different crowns, so you either get this 58mm or a fatter 68mm crown. This isn't necessarily designed for a stiffness increase, but more an aesthetic thing. So if you're fitting this to the front of a really burly e-bike, you might want to go for the 68mm crown just to match the looks of that a little bit better. And if not, and you want to save about 50 grams of weight, then go for the 58mm crown as we've tested, just to give the overall best performance. Talking about saving weight, it's certainly something that Fox has not been focusing on with the Podium. Instead, they've been focusing on other performance aspects. So this 170mm 58mm crown with a roughly 200mm steerer with a star nut fitted weighs in at 2,760 grams, which is roughly 400 grams or 0.8 pounds heavier than an equivalent Fox 38. But to the kind of people who are really going to cherish the performance increase of this fork, it might not matter too much. And certainly, I'm thinking so far that this might be the fork that I would choose to run if it was down to me on any bike in the future. And as for pricing, we're currently looking at $1,999 US, 2,199 British pounds, or 2,399 euros. As I mentioned, this is a flagship, top tier fork, and the price is certainly reflecting that.
Some people are going to be asking the question of, is there going to be a 180mm travel option coming?
Right.
And then I guess why maybe a 180mm travel option didn't become available to start with.
Yeah, I mean, so obviously this was a new venture for us, right? Not completely new. I mean, we've experimented with inverted forks in the past. Most people who are riding were enduro bikes were running 170. There are some people that run 180, and that's totally understandable. We left 180 out to start somewhere, and feel like we're giving ourselves the best chance to find the sweet spot we did. And leaving at 170 just felt like a little easier. It was like, let's not add too many challenges for this go. Being where we're at, I think we could probably do some moving things around and get there, and it would be fine. But we didn't know when we started, right? And so sometimes when you don't know and you got to go figure it out, it's easy to say, let's cross this option off just to not make it harder than it has to be.
Yeah, I guess at this point you've done all the learning that you need to do to make a 170 mil
Hindsight,
fork
right?
work.
Like, it's easy now.
So,
yeah.
I mean, at least you've got a good base to start from.
My initial impressions on the Fox Podium have been incredibly positive so far. I've not put a huge amount of time into the fork, and I think there's still a little bit of work to be done for the overall setup and getting that absolutely dialed in. But from my initial laps on this fork, I am already fairly convinced that it's always going to be the fork that I'll be choosing over a 38 if given the option. And that's not to say that I dislike the 38 or that I had a huge amount to complain about previously. It's just that the Podium has opened my eyes to some of the performance aspects of general forks in the market, not just the 38. They're potentially lacking slightly in what can be improved. And as such, yeah, I think so far I am really, really sold.
We'll talk about smoothness later when we get into something rough, but I am way up in compression. Still getting plenty of support from the fork while I'm pushing it. But with no harshness, no concern for hand fatigue. Incredible front wheel grip. Ah, it's good. And it just feels like no matter where the impact is coming from, it just reacts. Keeps things comfortable the whole way.
It's just the way that the Podium reacts to impacts, regardless of the direction, regardless of how you're kind of moving on the bike, that's so impressive to me. Regardless of, yeah, if you're in, tipped into a corner and you're hitting holes, if you just huck it into a root garden or a rock garden, or, like weird off-camber compressions and big G-outs, the fork just moves in the same way every time. It's just so predictable in that sense. And I really had concerns that it was going to be too torsionally flexible. But even as hard as I tried, I was squaring off some big turns in high grip scenarios in Leogang, moving fast with all my 100 kilos, 220 pounds body weight on an e-bike. And I never got the fork to be unnervingly flexible. That's not to say that I didn't feel any flex. That's not the case at all. It's just that if I am able to get away with the slight flex that's built into the fork, the same as the 36, then I think a lot of riders are going to be, perhaps it's not going to be the fork for you if you're just looking to square off bike park and do cutties and just play around in a free ride aspect. But the performance gains that you can get through rough terrain when pushing hard, trying to go fast in more of a race scenario, in natural rough enduro terrain, it's really been quite eye-opening so far, and it's really been very impressive. If somebody was to offer you not only improved comfort, but also improved support, that's the holy grail of suspension combinations, and you would take it every time, I'd wager. And so far, it really seems like the Fox Podium is able to do that. Yes, this is a paid feature. Thank you very much, Fox, for helping to support the production of this video. But I'm not just saying that because Fox has paid for this feature. Independently of that, I am just generally very impressed. I've even allowed some friends to have a go on this fork with, no money involved there, no reason for them to lie to me about the performance of it. And they've already said the same thing. They've echoed my thoughts, and they agree that it is also a pretty damn excellent fork.
Through this project, what are you most excited about and what are you most proud of?
I'm pretty excited about how the fork's working. I think it's given people some performance that we hadn't been able to deliver in a traditional package, as far as a smooth fork that rides. You can keep riding high in its travel. We can introduce more damping without it feeling like you're getting harsh. And when we can use damping to control things and we're not making sacrifices there to deal with other issues, you get better performance. Damping is, speed sensitive to how fast the fork's moving in either direction, and you have way more control over that with valving than you do if you're, just dealing with some inherent friction and bindings. As far as being proud, I think our team did a great job of overcoming some of the challenges that have been around in inverted forks, and I hope that people can get out there and ride it and maybe have their minds changed a little bit about that style design and that it can work.
Really excited to keep on logging miles on this. I'm also going to be doing a back-to-back test between this and the 38 on some trails here locally, getting both of them absolutely dialed in, doing back-to-back race runs to see if there is any difference on the track, under the clock. And yeah, I'm just really excited to keep on logging some time on the new Fox Podium, because so far I've been thoroughly enjoying its performance. Thank you very much for watching this feature on the new Fox Podium inverted single crown enduro fork. Hope you guys have enjoyed learning a little bit about it from Ariel and I, and getting a good glimpse of our first impressions on it. It's safe to say I'm really excited to keep on logging the miles on this thing, producing future features and the long-term review, so make sure you hit the subscribe button so you don't miss out on that. Leave us a comment below, let us know your thoughts on it. Do you think it's all hype, or is this something that you're really interested in trying? And thank you very much for watching. Hope to catch you out on the trails.